Hello, everybody. I am back for the Friday live stream. I am Jax James, the State Policy Manager for NORML, streaming to you today out of Austin, Texas. And I have an update that I want to go over today having to do with ballot initiatives and referenda across the country because there are things going on. So as always, I'd like you to drop where you're from in the comments. And if you're in a state that has currently going legislative sessions, I will check in and see if there are some actions in your state that you can participate in. But of course, if you've been watching the news, there was some movement in Congress yesterday. And if you go to norml.org, you can check out our blog post on it that Morgan Fox put out. And it has to do with House members advancing the safe banking reform as part of the NDAA package, and it includes cannabis protections for veterans. So I definitely encourage all of you guys to check that out and see what's going on there. I already see some of y'all are commenting where you're from. And I see Dallas, Texas. There's some stuff going on in Denton that I will be talking about today. Tennessee, New York, and Delaware and Florida, your legislative sessions are currently closed. When I was looking last week, there was only about between 8 and 10 states that have currently moving legislative sessions. The rest are in the election cycle, and we have quite a few states that are going to potentially have ballot initiatives on their ballot. So a lot of things to be looking forward to. So let me dive right in. As I mentioned, voters in several states will be deciding on marijuana-related ballot measures in November. And so I wanted to just give an update on where they stand. I'm going to go A to Z here. So Arkansas, the Responsible Growth Arkansas group, it's led by former Arkansas Democratic House Minority Leader Eddie Armstrong, and they have submitted more than double the signatures needed to qualify for the ballot in November. The proposed constitutional amendment would allow adults 21 and older to possess up to an ounce of cannabis. Home cultivation wouldn't be permitted, and the measure does not contain provisions to expunge past records or to provide social equity to applicants. However, this is a worthy effort, and if it can pass, hopefully some of these changes can be made in the future. Again, these signatures in Arkansas have been submitted, but they still have to be qualified by the Secretary of State. So once we hear that, we will know for sure that it will be on the ballot in November. But of course, with over double the amount of signatures needed, I think it's pretty likely that will happen. So for those of you in Maryland, lawmakers have given approval to a constitutional amendment known as House Bill 1, and it will ask voters, do you favor the legalization of adult cannabis in the state of Maryland? State lawmakers also approved this complementary legislation, HB 837, which would define the possession limits, facilitates automatic review of expunsion of past criminal records. And if approved by the voters, this referendum will take effect on July 1st of 2023. At that time, adults can legally possess up to an ounce and a half of cannabis and or 12 grams of concentrates. However, possessing between 1.5 ounces and 2.5 ounces would be subject to civil fines, while the possession of greater quantities would still be subject to the existing criminal penalties under the code. So lawmakers will still need to enact additional legislation next session to establish rules and regulations governing a legally regulated cannabis market. So a little bit of a complicated situation in Maryland, legislative and voting wise, but the too long didn't read is that if you live there, you will be able to vote if you support legalizing cannabis in November. And then the legislators will continue to build out the structure surrounding the outline that they created last session. They created that outline because they feel pretty confident that it will pass, and they wanted to make sure to have something already in place that was agreed upon that could be implemented quickly. Then let's go to Missouri. So there's a citizen initiative sponsored by a group called Legal Missouri 2022. And the effort there wants to allow 21 and older to possess, purchase, consume, and cultivate marijuana while allowing those with nonviolent marijuana-related offenses to automatically have their records expunged. The proposed measure also seeks to broaden industry participation to include small business owners, disadvantaged populations, including those with limited capital, residents of high poverty communities, service-disabled veterans, and those who have been previously convicted of nonviolent marijuana offenses. Additionally, the initiative works to make some improvements on the state's existing medical marijuana access program. In May, the representatives of the effort of Legal Missouri 2022 announced that they had submitted more than 385,000 signatures. That is more than double the total that is necessary to put the proposed constitutional amendment on the ballot. So we are very hopeful and pretty positive that that will be on the ballot in Missouri. So turning to Nebraska, Nebraska actually has two efforts underway. Nebraskans for Medical Marijuana have submitted signatures supporting two separate measures. One is called the Medical Cannabis Patient Protection Act, which protects patients with serious health conditions and their caregivers from arrest. Then number two is the Medical Cannabis Commission Act, which regulates private businesses that provide medical cannabis for qualified patients. So back in 2020, activists met the state signature requirement, but nonetheless, their measure was struck from the ballot after the Nebraska Supreme Court issued an opinion finding that the legislative language violated the state's single subject requirement. So this effort to have the two divided measures is an effort to ensure that they don't have that issue again. Last week, the organization turned in over 90,000 signatures for each of the medical cannabis legalization measures, just above the 87,000 signatures necessary to qualify. So that's a very slim margin there. And in addition to that slim margin, activists are also involved in a legal fight over the state's ballot access laws. The state there requires that you have 5% of your signatures from each county, or that I believe it's 5% of your signatures have to come from each county in the state. And they are arguing that point. And there's a link for you to find out more about that in the blog. So in Nebraska, it's going to be a tight one there. We'll be watching that closely, and hopefully there are enough signatures to qualify and no further issues with the court systems there. I've got a couple more states that I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to come back to the comments and see if you guys have any questions and check in on states that do have legislation moving. So just a few more. All right. In North Dakota, there is an organization called New Approach North Dakota. And earlier this week, they announced that they had turned in over 25,000 signatures to the Secretary of State office. That is roughly 10,000 signatures above the required number to qualify for the ballot in 2022. The measure would legalize possession of 1 ounce of cannabis and up to 4 grams of cannabis concentrates and up to 500 milligrams of cannabis in an infused product, as well as the cultivation of 3 plants. Historically, North Dakota has long had one of the highest marijuana arrest rates in the nation, despite having the lowest reported marijuana use of any state. So hopefully this will be able to get on the ballot and pass in North Dakota with that, signature overage. Hopefully it will qualify. A quick update in Ohio. Advocates for the Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol have agreed to a settlement that will postpone any opportunity for voters to decide on a citizen initiative on marijuana until November of 2023. But during the interim, NORML Appalachia is working with local partners to target multiple municipalities across the state for local measures that would eliminate criminal and civil penalties for marijuana possession. Then in Oklahoma, as I'm sure you know, there's several efforts there. But last week, representatives from New Approach PAC turned in over 164,000 signatures to the Secretary of State regarding SQ, or State Question 820. The total is well above the signatures necessary to qualify for the ballot. And so we do believe that that will qualify once those signatures are vetted. And SQ 820 would allow adults 21 and older to purchase and possess 1 ounce of cannabis and grow up to to 6 mature plants and 6 seedlings for personal use. The measure would also provide pathways for resentencing and or the expunging of your criminal records. However, it doesn't alter the Oklahoma Constitution, and therefore fewer signatures were needed to get it potentially placed on the ballot. It's of note that earlier this year, Republican Governor Kevin Stitt claimed that voters were misled when they approved medical cannabis legalization. And in June, he signed legislation into law, House Bill 3208, imposing a moratorium on the issuance of any new cannabis licenses. While campaigning for governor, Stitt also said that he personally opposed legalizing marijuana for adults and that he would campaign against it. But he also acknowledged that he would respect the will of the voters should they decide in favor of it. So last 2 states I want to talk about are South Dakota and Texas. In South Dakota, for the second consecutive election, voters in South Dakota will be able to decide a ballot measure to legalize marijuana for those 21 and up. In May, the Secretary of State confirmed that advocates had secured the number of signatures required to get initiated Measure 27 on the November ballot. It will permit adults to possess up to 1 ounce and cultivate up to 3 mature plants, and also be able to transfer cannabis without remuneration. That is a hard word to say today, apparently. The measure does not seek to establish a regulatory framework governing the license, production, and or sale of marijuana, however. Advocates limited the scope of the measure after a previous, more comprehensive measure had been approved back in 2020, but then was struck down by the state Supreme Court. So multiple states who have had some issues with courts in the past trying to be a little bit more targeted with their efforts. And South Dakota will be on the ballot because those signatures have been vetted and qualified. All right, our last one is in Texas, my home state. The only way to change marijuana laws in Texas is through the legislature, and it meets every 2 years for 140 days. However, localities do have some discretion in implementing first chance programs, diversion programs, and more. But there are cities that are called home rule cities, and these cities can also pass any regulation or law that is deemed necessary unless it is specifically prohibited by state law. So therefore, Ground Game Texas is working in several home rule cities across Texas to depenalize personal cannabis possession. Recently, in my city, Austin, Texas, we overwhelmingly passed the ballot initiative or the ballot measure called Prop A. It depenalized cannabis possession and prohibited police from executing no-knock warrants. Efforts are underway in Elgin, and Elgin has actually also qualified for the November ballot. Denton, Killeen, Harker Heights, and San Marcos have submitted their signatures for verification with the hopes of being on the ballot in November. So my fellow Texans, if you want to get involved in those cities, there is also a link there on volunteer opportunities. So, all right, let me come back to the comments. Hello, friends over here. Let's see where y'all are watching from. Awesome. Virginia. Virginia was doing their live stream earlier today. So make sure you go back and check it out. I did go over Oklahoma, New Jersey. Okay, so New Jersey is actually one of the few states that is currently in a legislative session. So for anyone who is interested in participating in a legislative action alert, this is how you do it. You go to norml.org/act and you hover over the state, your state, in the dynamic map there. If there's legislation going on in your state, you'll see a little bubble pop up and it'll tell you how many bills you can participate on, and you can click all those links and participate on the actions that we have there. Now, let's say perhaps there's not any actions in your state. Never fear. At the very top of the page, there are 5 federal actions that we want you to participate in, especially the one that just moved through the House with the NDAA. So in New Jersey, there is legislation regarding patient protections, medical cannabis tax exemption, insurance coverage, home cultivation, employment protections, and DUI. So for those of y'all in New Jersey, please make sure that you participate in those action alerts. Pennsylvania, you guys are actually in session as well. Let me find y'all one second. Why are you not sorted A to Z? There we go. Okay, Pennsylvania. There is home grow legislation, banking legislation, DUI legislation, legislation to decriminalize and legalize. And there actually is a bit of legislation that we oppose that would strip some patient protections. So go to normal.org/act and take part in those action alerts if you are in Pennsylvania. California, y'all have a lot of legislation actually having to do with fine tuning the program. And I strongly suggest that you watch and tune into California NORML. They've got great updates, very detailed, and they are doing a great job there. Oklahoma and Arkansas, we covered those. Okay, great. All right. I think I covered all the states with you, friends. So let's go over what we want to do today. Click my update blog on the ballot initiative and referenda to see if it is addressed in your area. You can also go to normal.org/act and participate in our federal action alerts, and also use that dynamic map to hover over your state and see if there's any moving legislation near you. And then, of course, I do want to encourage you, if you support NORML's mission and you appreciate us being a consumer and patient-based advocacy group, I encourage you to go to normal.org and join, become a dues-paying member, or become a donor. You can do that as well. And also, if you're interested in connecting with chapters near you as the election cycle revs up and as legislation is moving, I encourage you to check out and see if there's a chapter near you. If there's not, you can always find out how to start one so that there is one near you. And lastly, I wanted to let you guys know that in the coming weeks, we're going to be putting out our Smoke the Vote. And so stay tuned for that. It should be out in just a few weeks. We are diligently working on collecting all of the best information and doing grading for you guys. So make sure that you stay tuned. I will be letting y'all know whenever that is due out. So on that note, I want to wish everybody a lovely Friday. I hope you have an amazing weekend, and I really hope that all of you will participate in those federal action alerts. That was really big movement that we had in Congress the other day, so please do participate in those action alerts and have a safe and wonderful weekend. So thanks, guys. I will see you next Friday.